very based in Christian nation, man. Very based in Christian, very red-pilled, very dedicated to the faith. I mean, so dedicated to the faith that none of them can get out of bed once a month to go to church. I wanted to talk about this topic for a while, because something I often hear from people, and this is from people on the complete end of the political spectrum for me. See, I'm a progressive, so this type of stuff doesn't really matter to me. I think it's just like really nonsensical. I wouldn't understand why somebody would support Russia for this reason. But every once in a while, you hear from somebody like Nick Fuentes, or in this instance, Samesex Khan, somebody who used to write for Press TV, which is the Iranian state news outlet, which has been engaged in things like Holocaust denial. You'll hear something along the lines of, "Oh, I support Russia and Russia invading Ukraine because they're fighting NATO, and NATO is gay and lefty, dumb, and they're not Christian and based enough. Well, Russia is a Christian-based trad paradise." You'll hear something along those lines. That from white supremacists, it might be the line that Vladimir Putin is fighting for the white world. From other people, you hear the line like, "Oh, he's fighting for the Christian world. He's the last true Christian leader of the world. He's the inheritor of the next Roman Empire." This is like a Russian, this is like a really Russian nationalistic talking point. You've heard people like Alexander Dugin repeat this, but he's the leader of a new Rome. He's the inheritor of Rome, and he's the leader of the Christians everywhere. And he is bringing Christianity into a new age, and we need him to win this war to save everyone's soul from the devil and save Christianity. And here is one example of somebody saying that. Again, somebody used to write for the Iranian state news outlet. "Russia is a Christian nation that stands for traditional family values with a strict ban on LGBT propaganda and gender ideology. Ukraine is a loser pagan nation, and Zelensky is preparing to legalize same-sex marriage in a pathetic attempt to pander to the woke left." And then she says, "Pick your fighter." So first off, I would just like to put out there that hearing Samesex Khan endorse the LGBT propaganda laws, which, to be clear, the LGBT propaganda law simply states, if you ever present homosexuality in a positive manner and not a negative manner, then you can be fined and or arrested. It is illegal to present homosexuality as a positive or okay or even normal thing whatsoever. So let's say that I was to do a TV show and I was a gay character and I said, "Hello, I have a good job and I am okay." That is illegal. You cannot, that alone would be illegal on Russian state television and could get you in a lot of legal trouble over the now expanded gay propaganda laws. It was expanded to include that. It used to be that it was illegal to have any type of queer representation in media that could ever be directed at children or even near children. Now it's been expanded to basically say Russians should be kept away from queerness in all of its forms at all times, unless you're literally portraying gays as drug-addled, AIDS-riddled, terrible, terrible, terrible people. That's the only way you can portray them in Russian society. And so she shows that as a law against LGBT propaganda. To me, it is a law enforcing anti-LGBT propaganda, since it is saying specifically it is illegal to present homosexuality in a normal or okay light whatsoever, okay? And hearing from somebody like Samesex Khan, who has a lot of like favorable views of the Iranian government and favorable views of dictatorships all over the world, who has been in the United States, I think is possibly living in the United States currently, who is protected by American First Amendment protections, where if we didn't have American First Amendment protections and we ran this country like how the Russians run their country, she would be in a prison cell. It's crazy to see people using the First Amendment to attack freedom of expression internationally. Definitely when it's from the like free speech crowd. Anyway, that's the first thing. The second thing, she calls Ukraine a pagan nation. The majority of Ukrainians are not pagan. They are Christian. I think she's just saying this because there is a pagan community in Ukraine, and she hates that. She says Ukraine is a loser nation, but Russia has been invading Ukraine for over a year now, and they have yet to make Ukraine lose. Russia has been unable to achieve any of its goals. It has been unable to achieve stopping the expansion of NATO. Finland is about to join NATO. Turkey just gave thumbs up to it. Sweden is on a track to join NATO as well. NATO is actively expanding, including onto an area that is right on Russia's border. Finland has the largest border with Russia. It will actually be the largest border with a NATO state will be in Finland that Russia has, and that's due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Prime Minister of Finland, I was listening to an interview from her recently. She has supported Finland joining NATO for a while, but this war made it politically viable for her to do it because now the majority of Finns support NATO membership, as well as the majority of Finns. So that has been a loss for Putin. He has been unable to change the governments in Ukraine, so that has been a loss for Putin. They wanted to do regime change. They wanted to put Yanukovych back in power. They have been unable to, quote unquote, demilitarize Ukraine. Ukraine is more militarized than ever and has more of an ability to defend itself than ever due to Western weapon supplies. Denazification, even though I don't think it was ever a real justification, has been a massive failure, as Russia has given guns to militias like Rusich, which is literally a neo-Nazi militia, to do fighting in Ukraine. So they're giving guns to Nazis to fight Nazis. Or I wonder how that works when they capture one of these Nazis. They're like, hey, you don't like Hitler in the right way. You like Hitler because you, in a weird like Ukrainian fetishy way, when you should be liking him in a Russian fetishy way. Anyway, this whole tweet is a complete mess, right? Oh, also the idea that Zelensky is preparing to legalize same-sex marriage, that's not true. Zelensky's actually suggesting the legalization of civil partnerships between men and women, like men and women and women. And there's been legislation introduced in the Rada in order to make that possible. Now, some people have said, and I've heard this argument that, hey, that's not okay because, Ukraine should just be concentrating on the war. Two things. Number one, just because Ukraine's at war does not mean that the state should literally just stop functioning, that like the country should just like only think about war 24/7. It's still a country, and a lot of times war can actually intensify political stage in a country, intensify progress. And secondly, a lot of Ukrainian queers are fighting for Ukraine, but if they were to die, their significant others could not help manage medical care and medical expenses, and their significant other could also not possibly retrieve their body if they were to die in combat. And so I think it is really inhumane to deny people who are fighting for their country to be able to say, I want the person I love to manage my affairs if the worst were to happen. I think that's terrible. And I think it's right for Ukraine to be going in this direction. What she says here about the legalization of same-sex marriage is actually more based and would be better than what Ukraine's currently doing. Even though this is a massive step forward, the fact that this is even being talked about openly in Ukrainian society when they're in between Poland and Russia, two famously homophobic states. Obviously, Russia doing a lot more restrictions on the queer community than Poland, since Poland's an EU member state and they wouldn't even be able to while staying in the EU. So that's just this tweet alone. But I want to talk about a wider notion surrounding this tweet. And that's the idea that Russia is a based Christian nation that stands for traditional family values. Let me say that again. Russia is a based Christian nation that stands for traditional family values, because that type of stuff, like the stuff that she would care about, like doesn't matter too much for me. Like I like the idea of a father and a mother, being there to raise a child and, having somebody there to guide a child to adulthood and guide them through, their life, which can be confusing at times. I think that's good. I also think two men can do it. I also think two women can do it, but I think that's good. There's some like values that like a traditional Christian household that I could possibly like get on board with, like, strong work ethic, stuff like that. But the stuff she's talking about, as she mentions in this tweet, is more of the conservative family values around those gays. That's the type of stuff she's talking about. And the thing is, outside of just like outright bigotry, Russia is not a tradition, like, is not that traditionally based and red-pilled when it comes to the Christian faith. Or at least they don't practice it in a quote-unquote based and red-pilled way. Not that I would particularly care. But if there's ever going to be anybody who watches this segment that is of that view, that Russia is a based Christian nation, that Russia is a, an amazing, bastion of conservatism on the world stage, I wanted to talk about just some hard facts, some hard truths that someone like Samira Khan, someone like maybe Jackson Hinkle, someone like Russian, somebody who maybe goes on Russian state media might not want you to know about how based and Christian Russia is. So the first thing I want to talk about is the crazy abortion rates in Russia. Just the hard statistics about it. So Russia has one of the highest abortion rates in the world, as well as a lot of the post-Soviet sphere. I know this is Wikipedia, but I had to pick some source, and this said it most succinctly, so I'm using this one. Despite a significant reduction in the abortion to birth ratio since the mid-1990s, the countries of the former Soviet Union maintained the highest rate of abortions in the world. In 2001, this was during Putin's administration, by the way, during the start of it, 1.31 million children were born in Russia, while 2.11 million abortions were performed. In 2005, 1.6 million abortions were registered in Russia. 20% of these abortions involved girls under the age of 18. Official statistics put the number of abortions at 450,000 in 2020. As of 2021, the abortion rate was 12 abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44. Now, this is according to official state statistics. This does not include back alley abortions, and there's my mic just went off. There's a lot of accusations that they're fudging the numbers, but it is still true to this day that Russia has a tremendously high abortion rate. As a percentage, I actually think there's a decent chance that it's actually still higher than the United States abortion rate. Or even if it isn't, it's still at such a level that I don't think you can be claiming to be this based conservative Christian country when abortion is still readily available within Russia. And during Putin's administration, there are more abortions at many periods during that administration than there are even births. Abortion is still a major thing in Russia. It still is something that a lot of girls, even under the age of 18, go through. And that based Christian perspective is not the current law of the land in Russia. But that's just one example of Russia not being the super based Christian nation. I also want to talk about the church, not just the fact that Russians have started identifying as Orthodox Christian, because it's one thing to identify as Orthodox Christian. Hell, the majority of Americans identify as Christian. But if you talk to somebody who's maybe like a Groyper or maybe like a super hardcore evangelical conservative Christian, they're going to tell you being a Christian is a lot more than just saying, hello, I am a Christian. It is practicing the faith. It is going through with the values of the faith. It is behaving in certain ways in society and practicing certain Christian norms and traditions. For example, they would probably say that if you get an abortion, you're probably not a true Christian, or you're not following their version of Christianity. So that's already something that I think addresses the last thing we're talking about. But I think one of the parts of Christianity, for a lot of people at least, definitely in the United States, is church attendance. I think church attendance is a good way to look at how religious your nation is. Not necessarily because you have to go to church in order to be a member of the faith. That's not necessarily true. There are a lot of people who are very, 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 very devout Christians, but they don't go to church in the United States, either because they don't like how the establishment of religion in that way, and they don't agree with pastors, but they have a different interpretation, or maybe they believe that God is with them at all times, so they do not need to go into the house of the Lord in order to, practice their Christianity. But, and pollsters have talked about this when I was looking into the polling data, that when you look at church attendance rates, it's a good way to look at somebody's it's usually a good way to look at a society's level of religiosity, its knowledge about the faith, and a good way to look at their commitment to the faith outside of just their identity and how they identify as an individual. Because somebody can identify as a Christian while also not practicing any of the norms or traditions of the religion. And the current rate of church attendance in Russia is not great. So these are some of the numbers, and the numbers don't really change here at all in the last 10 years. It hasn't gone up. These are the numbers for the amount of church attendance in Russia. So the first number here, and this is the main number I want to concentrate on, is the amount of Russians who attend religious services at least once a month. That means one day out of 31, one day a month, you either go to a church or you go to a religious service. So that means you don't even necessarily need to go to a official church building, but just some religious type service. It doesn't even mean you have to go to church, but just a religious type service. The rate currently in Russia is about between, and the numbers are a little different between the pollsters, 6% and 7% of Russians attend church on a monthly basis, once a month. That is a tremendously low number. It has gone up since the Soviet Union, but it's only gone up about 5% since the Soviet Union. And it's actually gone down during Putin's time in office, because in 1998 it was 9%, and since then it's actually gone down some. And this is at the same time that there's been a massive boom in construction of churches all across Russia. If you look up the amount of churches being built in Russia, it's actually staggering. The thousands upon thousands upon thousands of churches that have been built in Russia in just the last 20 years. And you would think with all these new churches being built, people would take advantage of it and be going to these weekly or even, and this is the standard that we're asking for now, monthly services. But no, that's not happening. The majority of Russians do not attend church on a monthly basis. Hell, the majority of Russia, it's not even close to a majority. We're talking like 7%. If you would compare this to the United States, here's a Fox poll, and this is a Fox poll lamenting, oh my God, a third of Americans have quit church attendance as attendance fails to recover from pandemic numbers. So this is an article talking about, damn, due to the pandemic, a lot of people are no longer going to church. Because during the pandemic in 2020, people didn't go to in-person church because they were scared about giving the elderly COVID or scared about catching COVID. And so church attendance rates during 2020 went down, and it went down to like 15%. Now, that means the low number for America, 15% during the pandemic, is still double than what we see in Russia bi-monthly. But now it's recovered somewhat, and the numbers are about like 25 to 33% of Americans attend church every month. That knocks Russia's numbers completely out of the park. This leads me to believe that the gayest part of LA seems to have probably a higher church attendance rate than Russia does on average. The gayest part of LA probably has a higher church attendance rate than Russia does on average. Very based in Christian nation, man. Very based in Christian, very red-pilled, very dedicated to the faith. I mean, so dedicated to the faith that none of them can get out of bed once a month to go to church after they've have more freedom to go to church after the collapse of the Soviet Union. This was something that was being held back somewhat by the Soviet Union. You know, the Soviet Union didn't completely ban doing anything religious or anything, but they certainly did not like the church and did not have a positive relationship with the church, and there was a lot of state influence on the church, which motivated people to go away from it, to go away from the church. Not only due to the state control, a lot of people, you know, prayed in private, prayed away from the influence of the church, but also because the communist ideology encouraged atheism. They thought that religion was an opium of the masses. This is something that Karl Marx talked about in his writings. But no, now that that freedom has been given back to the Russians, and more Russians than ever identify as Eastern Orthodox, I think it's about 78% of Russians now identify as Eastern Orthodox, they can't seem to get out of bed to actually go to church. And let me go to another statistic, which is honestly very, very depressing. I'm just going to do the Wilson Quarterly. This isn't a piece just about this, but I do think that it's a good piece to talk about this. So this is about alcoholism in Russia, which is a massive issue. Not a big surprise here. It's kind of a stereotype that Russia has a drinking problem. It's had a drinking problem for a while. The Russian Tsardom actually used to have a monopoly on vodka and would make money off of it and off the sale of vodka to its people. They made a lot of money off of it, and they kind of used alcohol to kind of placate the people and subdue them, because if you're drunk, it's kind of hard for you to pick up a gun and shoot the person who's domineering over you, who's ruling over you. If you're wasted, you can't engage in revolution is the idea, right? But this isn't the main thing I want to talk about, is just the alcoholism, because you can be a drunkard and be a Christian, I guess. I mean, gluttony is, still against a principle of the Christian faith, but it's possible. But there's something in here that I do not think shows care for children, that does not show the quote unquote traditional family values that Samira Khan is talking about here in reference to the Russian nation state. And that has to do with the rates of fetal alcohol syndrome in Russia. And I'm not talking about this from like a ha-ha look at the Russians. This is honestly a very depressing statistic. And it honestly...
Увага! Відбій повітряної тривоги.
Oh, it's air sirens. Sorry, there's air... I can hear it in the distance now. There's air sirens going off outside. It's just, this is a soundproof hotel, so it's very hard to hear it. I can like barely hear it outside. That was an identification from the alarm system in my hostel that's basically telling me, hey, we're getting bombed. Or there's missiles inbound, Shahid drones inbound. Those are drones provided to the Russians by the Iranian government in order to bomb Ukraine. That goes off to let you know, like, hey, you should probably take cover, or hey, you should probably like do something to get safe. Anyway, back with the story. We got a little distracted there. I wanted to talk about the fetal alcohol syndrome rates. One second. I don't want to lose where the number is. Here it is. The life expectancy of a Russian male born this year is just 60 years, nearly 20 years less than that of Italian and French counterparts, and his death may well come from alcohol poisoning or other drink-related accidents, suicide, or heart attacks. Overall, alcohol contributes to 500,000 Russian deaths a year. That is an insane statistic when you're talking about a country that's going through a demographic crisis. Fetal alcohol syndrome, which causes marked physical and neurological impairments, is epidemic. A 2006 Tufts University study found that more of half... Oh my God. I'm sorry, this statistic always shakes me. A 2006 Tufts University study found that more than half of children in one Russian city orphanages suffered from the disorder. Now, we don't got an exact number on like how many Russian children suffer from fetal alcohol poisoning or fetal alcohol syndrome. A lot of it goes undiagnosed because a lot of the healthcare options in Russia aren't exactly great for taking care of children, which another aspect of their totally trad-based traditional family values country, when their healthcare options are not exactly great for new families, for new mothers and new fathers. But drinking your child into fetal alcohol syndrome is not an example of based Russian traditional Christian values. Drinking yourself to death to the point where you can't no longer take care of your child, either because you're too drunk to take care of them, or you've literally killed yourself through alcohol poisoning, is not a base traditional Christian value. You want to know where crocodile came from? I don't know if you guys know what crocodile is. Crocodile is a horrific drug. Crocodile. And the reason it's called crocodile, it's kind of like heroin, is because of the markings it leaves on people's bodies. Is because of the markings like this, where it literally starts to rot away your skin. It's really horrific to look at. I won't make you look at it for long. The reason it's called crocodile is because it turns your skin to something resembling a crocodile's skin, because it starts to literally rot away your skin from the inside. This drug is really horrific. It's really, really terrible. You want to know where it originated? Russia. That seems very based. That seems very Christian. Oh my gosh, who doesn't want to turn themselves into a living alligator man? That seems like a base Christian value. Okay, putting all this aside, right? Like, let's just like kind of wrap this all up in a moment. I am not doing this to just say, hey guys, wow, Russia sucks. You know, look how Russophobic I am. They're all drinking themselves to death, or they're giving their kids fetal alcohol poisoning, or you know, they're not attending church as they claim to be Christian, or they're having all these abortions and they originated crocodile. That's not the purpose of this piece. I'm not doing that. That would be really kind of messed up if I was like doing this to just be like, haha, look at Russia. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm sick of the fetishization from the right in the United States of Russia, where a lot of people saw Putin going into church and praying, or he's shirtless riding a horse, or they hear him talking about the gays, or they see the Russian state's bigotry towards LGBTQ plus people, and they assume that they're just some based Christian, amazing country where everybody's living to the faith and they're holding themselves to a higher moral standard. When they have a lower church attendance rate than the United States, they have fetal alcohol syndrome poisoning, which is not good taking care of your children. They have all these different problems that I've already laid out, and these are just some of it. If I really wanted to, I could make this like a 1.5 hour segment of going through every single issue in Russian society that shows that its based Christian ways are not having the desired effects, that are not turning them into the base Christian heaven on earth that some people seem to present Russia as. This image of Russia was choreographed, was designed by the government of Russia in order to attract the affection of people like Samira Khan from the hardcore right in the United States and the far right internationally. They want to give this aesthetic out to the world in order to present themselves as the upholder of Christianity. But when you look internally into Russia, into how the policies of the Kremlin have affected their people, there are no prisoners policy on drug abuse. Their policy of like, if you do drugs, you're going to prison. There's no exceptions, no needle exchange programs. There's none of this. A completely like hard war on drugs. The American war on drugs is bad. The Russian war on drugs is next level. It's like near what the Philippines did when they're just saying, go out there and shoot drug users. That has failed in dealing with the country's drug crisis. This building of churches all across the country has not solved their issues with alcoholism and has not solved their issues with fetal alcohol syndrome. And it hasn't even resulted in higher rates of church attendance, for God's sakes. They're building these buildings for nobody to go visit them outside of like, woo la la, that's a pretty building, snap a picture, that a tourist might do every once in a while, that someone like Samira Khan might do once in a while. They're just falling for the establishment narrative of the Russian government and painting this fetishized version of Russian society, when Russian society is not the based trad con heaven on earth that many people portray it as. It's a very flawed society whose religiosity has been, let's say, not sufficient in solving its problems, if its religiosity is even to the levels that the Russian state portrays, which church attendance rates seem to tell another story about. Anyway, that's enough of this. I just wanted to be Russophobic for an hour. Joking.